Okay, mesdames, messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, good afternoon and welcome to the 2024 Victoria Forum. Bienvenue à tous sur le Forum de Victoria. Nous sommes honorés par votre présence, and a special welcome to all of our international participants, both here and online. I'm Saul Klein, Executive Director of the Victoria Forum, and je suis votre maître de cérémonie pour aujourd'hui. I begin by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory we're meeting, and the Wasanich peoples who are in working relationships with the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, all of whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We were expecting Chief Ron Sam from the Songhees Nation. He might be delayed, so, oh, he's right there. Oh, apologies. So, to welcome us to the territory and ensure a good start for our deliberations, I'd like to call upon the Chief of the Songhees Nation, Chief Ron Sam. Sorry, I didn't see you there. Thank you very
much. Good afternoon, everybody. I kind of snuck in the back door and didn't say hi to anybody on the way in, so no apologies in not seeing me over there. I was actually, it kind of fits with kind of the theme, like building trust, or how do we build trust in local governments and Indigenous governments and citizens and people. But what brought me here early was I was building trust for our community. And again, I'm just going to mention it because I had the honor of meeting with the mayor of the city of Victoria. So Mayor Alto, who's here with us, we took the time out to just go in the back council room and talk about business of our communities. And really, I see that as kind of fitting this theme in building trust. But this moves it into a bigger kind of sphere and atmosphere because of all the goings on around us in the current climates and environments of political parties and people and citizens digesting that information. And so really good topics that you're all delving into, key points in time to really have these discussions. But as I looked at the title, right, it kind of made me think, is all the talk just still going on, really? And when are we going to move into some concrete action in backing up what everybody's really been talking about for years? Trust in governance is not anything new to us. It's just kind of ramped up over the last couple of years, and I think we all know why. I'm not going to mention it, but just welcome you all to our beautiful home. Your Honor, always a pleasure to have you here in our company, here in our building. Always nice to see you. And just on behalf of our community, Songhees Nation, we are a part of the Lekwungen as a whole, which includes our neighbors right next door here, Esquimalt Nation. Just welcome you to our home here, which was built for our people. Was built as a dream to bring conferences like this, meetings like this, people from outside of our community into our community, to be here with us, or to at least be in our space to maybe hear about us, learn about us a little bit while you're here. Very action-packed for you over the next few days. I was looking through the agenda. Wow, amazing plenaries and workshops. So to all those involved in those, all those putting this together, all the people behind the scenes, because we always do forget about those people sometimes. If it wasn't the people behind the scenes, we wouldn't be doing the things we do. So to all those people pulling in some way to make this happen for you over the next few days, hands up to them. And on behalf of Songhees Nation, our elders, our youth, our people here, just thank you for bringing yourself here and supporting, because I see regenerative economy on the agenda, right? And we saw this as a way of us being able to participate in this regional economy with things like you and hosting people like you. So thank you for coming to the Wellness Center, and thank you to you, Vic, for for always thinking of us and being a good institution in our territory. So many hajkas, and just hopefully you get out to see our beautiful territory and our beautiful city while you're here, and not just be all information every day, all day. Just hopefully they have some fun things planned for you in the region here. So enjoy your time, Songhees Nation. Thank you very much.
Chief Sam. Great. Well, thank you, Chief Sam, for your kind words and also your generous hospitality here at the Songhees Wellness Center. Nous sommes honorés d'avoir réussi à organiser le Forum de Victoria en partenariat avec l'Université de Victoria et le Sénat du Canada. C'est un exploit historique sur lequel nous continuons de développer de nouveaux partenariats. The Victoria Forum was created in 2017 out of a concern that our world was fragmenting and that we needed to find better solutions to the problems facing us all. As we meet again in 2024, these problems persist as we grapple with political and economic uncertainty and fail to prevent the ravages of war. We come together recommitted to finding solutions to long-standing tensions and to shifting our current trajectory. Over the past year, the Victoria Forum has been restructured as a separately incorporated nonprofit society in order to solidify our distinct identity, increase the scale and scope of our activities, and enhance our impact. We're already seeing the effects of this organizational change, with this being our largest Victoria Forum to date, with over 650 in-person delegates and several hundred more online. Over the next couple of days, we'll hear from 170 speakers in 40 sessions, which is a remarkable number. At the Victoria Forum, we convene gatherings to develop solutions to the world's most pressing problems, whether they be environmental, social, political, or economic in nature. We believe that problems have solutions and that the status quo is neither desirable nor sustainable. Our work is grounded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family as the foundations of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. We're committed to supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in pursuit of the 2030 Agenda, whose targets are unfortunately looking increasingly elusive. To make progress in these areas, we have structured our work along three major themes. One, the regenerative economy, which focuses on the nature of our economic system and the need for a new approach that goes beyond limiting negative externalities towards one of encouraging net positive outcomes and addressing the looming catastrophic effects of climate change. Two, equity and social justice, which addresses fundamental issues of reconciliation, fairness, and equality of opportunity, and access to public goods such as healthcare and education. And three, peace and democracy, which is concerned with the nature of our political system, the strength of our institutions, and the avoidance of armed conflict. We recognize that these themes overlap and that our challenges have multiple dimensions. At the same time, we've identified a critical commonality that is both the cause of our difficulties and an impediment to finding solutions, and that is the erosion of trust. Only by building trust can we pave the way for a future that is not just shared, but also prosperous and harmonious. Building trust entails different ways of thinking and acting, and it is in response to this necessity that the Victoria Forum was created. It is to this end that our discussions will be focused over the coming days, combating the scourge of myths and disinformation in the process. Our program for today will start with some welcome remarks, followed by our opening panel. This panel discussion will be followed by a reception. For making all of this possible, I would like to thank our sponsors. First, our co-hosts, the Senate of Canada and the University of Victoria. I'm proud to acknowledge that 15 current senators are joining us at this forum. So we can call us the West Coast version of the Senate. I would also like to thank our founding sponsors, TELUS and the Gustafson School of Business, for having the foresight and the sense of broader purpose to support this type of initiative. As well as I'd like to thank our event sponsors, Power Corporation, Coast Capital Savings, the Transition Accelerator, the Regenerative Capital Group, Second Muse, Raven Indigenous Impact Foundation, the City of Victoria, the Definity Foundation, ACET, Accelerating Community Energy Transformation, the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, and the Victoria Foundation. Without their generous support, the Victoria Forum could not happen. So thank you all to all our generous sponsors. As a nonprofit, we're funded entirely by donations. You can tell what's coming next. And we ask all of you to consider making a contribution to help us defray our costs. Contributions can be made at our registration desks or online, and QR codes will be available throughout the forum. I'd also like to thank our organizational partners for seeing the value of working together with us in the search for solutions. The Conference Board of Canada, the South Island Prosperity Partnership, the Global Business School Network, who together with Watson University in India and the College of Business and Economics at Qatar University support our international student competition. Global Affairs Canada, the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, the Coalition for a Better Future, the Cascade Institute, Social Innovation Canada, Academics Without Borders, Excellence Canada, the Royal BC Museum, Catalyst 2030, the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, Sparks Publishing Group, Pearson College, the National Consortium for Indigenous Economic Development, the European Foundation for Management Development, Sunset Labs, and Dark Matter Labs. So thank you all. And now to formally open the 2024 Victoria Forum, we have a pre-recorded message from the Honorable Raimonda Gagné, Speaker of the Senate of Canada. If you want to turn to the screen.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. C'est un immense honneur et un privilège de pouvoir prononcer un mot de bienvenue, bien que virtuellement, à l'occasion du lancement de l'édition de 2024 du Forum de Victoria. Le thème de cette année, Bâtir la confiance pour un avenir partagé, est crucial pour l'avenir de notre société canadienne et mondiale. The Victoria Forum creates a space for dialogue and collaboration on critical issues of interest to parliamentarians, academics, governments, and civil society. It is a platform for sharing ideas, developing innovative initiatives, and creating sustainable solutions for a promising future. With so many challenges, but also so many opportunities, it is essential that we work together in Parliament, government, the private sector, academia, and civil society to create sustainable solutions and a prosperous Canada. Enfin, je voudrais reconnaître et remercier les Premières Nations, Songhees et Esquimalt, passées, présentes et futures, pour leur préservation, leur protection et leur leadership de ces terres où se tient le Forum de Victoria. Je vous souhaite un bon Forum de Victoria. Merci, thank you, miigwech.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'd like to call up our other co-host, Dr. Kevin Hall, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Victoria.
Yeah, thanks, Saul, for the invitation to come to this. I remember 2 years ago at the first one, you took my speaking notes and I kind of had to make things up, which I'll probably do today anyway. So I wanted to first start off by thanking Chief Ron Sam. Thank you for your opening remarks today, but more importantly, thank you for all you do for this community and all you do for UVic and giving us your knowledge, culture, and just the way that you're unselfish. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you. I wanted to welcome also Her Honor, I was going to say Her Highness, but Her Honor, Janet Austin, Lieutenant Governor of this province, who also contributes so much to this community, to this province, and to this country. And thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to come today. I'd acknowledge we are here on the lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I'll pay my respects to elders past and present. And I personally pledge to walk the path to reconciliation together, which I hope all of us here in the room will get behind. And so this great initiative, this forum, it's a chance, as you heard from Saul, 650 people that are going to be here. Wow, that's incredible. So just make sure you go out and meet, I don't know, pick half of that, 325 new people you need to make a relationship over the next few days. But more importantly, when you meet people, make an agreement to actually do something together, to collaborate. And you heard Chief Sam say, we often have lots of words, but not lots of action. So this is your chance to make those connections and have actions. At UVic, we absolutely thrive on hosting events like this, where people get together to have good dialogue, have a diversity of opinions. And this event is just a fantastic forum for that. And the theme is really close to the heart of UVic. The theme of, I just find the theme here. Yes, building trust for a shared future. We have a new strategic plan at UVic. It was created by over 6,000 voices from UVic, and we mashed it all together. And one of the themes that rose to the top was called Partnering for a Shared Future, and the importance of working together to solutions, and for universities to break out of their horrible partnership modes, which is like, come to us, we're the university, we're smart, listen to what we say. And so we really, truly believe at UVic in two-way, deep, meaningful partnerships where we all learn from each other. And again, you've got this wonderful opportunity to do that over the next few days. The other thing I would say is there's a theme that runs through this this year, and you can look in your program, and it has all the Sustainable Development Goals matched to the different talks that you're going to see and hear. And just to again let you know that at UVic SDGs are really, really important. We actually host one of 32 United Nations Institutes for Training and Research, and that gives us a deep commitment to make sure we look at SDGs in every part of our business, not just the education of students or the research we do, but in things like our purchasing policies, our hiring policies, the way we try to show up in the community. And so again, over this course of this meeting that you're going to have, really try to deeply embrace the concept behind the Sustainable Development Goals. And as Saul said, sadly, it's estimated we're going to achieve 30% of what we set out to achieve in 2015 around the SDGs by 2030. 30%. It's a pretty bad number. I was just in New York 3 weeks ago at the annual meeting of the UN around SDGs, and it's looking pretty grim. And so it takes people like you in this room to really start making this move quicker, make sure we think about everybody on this planet when we make decisions around climate, when we make decisions around purchasing, just think about everybody. Okay, now what did they write down for me to say? I'm supposed to thank the sponsors, but you heard Saul, he thanked all the 168 sponsors. So that was fantastic. So I just really enjoy this. Get out and make the most of it. You're here for discussion, so don't sit on your chair and just listen. Make sure you participate fully this week, and you'll get so much out of this. And Saul, thanks to you and your group to put this together. It looks like an amazing program. And on behalf of the University of Victoria, well, enjoy yourselves. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. As a professor and former dean at UVic, I appreciate your leadership. We'll hear more from Dr. Hall tomorrow afternoon in a panel of university presidents. As you all know, and I think what we've just heard now, university presidents are very much in the firing line across North America, around the world. So, Kevin, you've got your work cut out for you. The Victoria Forum is about driving change and having an impact. In this regard, different initiatives launched at previous forums have taken root. I'd like to showcase two of these and call up their proponents to highlight how their work has progressed. First, please welcome former Chief of the Six Nations of the Grand River and co-chair of the Commonwealth Sport Indigenous Declaration Working Group and a member of the board of the Victoria Forum, Ava Hill, to provide an update on the Lekwungen Declaration that was finalized when we last met in 2022.
Yawaso. Thank you. Sego. Yoha Haji. Nyangats. Kanyange Hage. Haudenosaunee, Six Nations of the Grand River. My traditional name is Yoha Haji, and I am a Mohawk from the Six Nations of the Grand River. I wanted to thank Chief Sam, but I think that he may have left. Is he still here? Because I wanted to rib him a little bit, because the last time we were here, we talked lacrosse. And I know the Victoria Shamrocks have just won the Western Championship in Six Nations, just got to win 2 more games against Peterborough, and then we'll welcome Victoria to Six Nations for the Mann Cup. Anyway, so I just wanted to thank him as well for welcoming us to the Songhees territory. As Saul has said, I've been asked to speak about the Commonwealth sport, the Lekwungen Declaration on reconciliation and partnership with Indigenous peoples. This declaration had its beginning at the 2016 Annual Assembly of the Commonwealth Games Federation in Edmonton, Alberta. And it's also a follow-up to the Reconciliation Action Plan that was developed for the Gold Coast Games in 2018 in Australia. In 2019, I traveled to London, England. I had decided I wasn't seeking re-election as chief. And as Saul said, I was on their advisory board, and they invited me to England to do some recruiting for more speakers for the Victoria Forum. And during that time, I thought I should follow up with the CEO of the Commonwealth Games Federation and say, what's going on with this declaration? And Saul and Adele Gutoni said, can we come with you? I said, sure, come to the meeting with me. And they started talking about when the Commonwealth Games were held in Victoria, and when Kathy Freeman, an Aboriginal runner from Australia, won the 400 meters and ran around the track with the Aboriginal flag, and then got chastised by her chef de mission for doing that. Anyway, as a result, the formation and the establishment of this declaration became a huge component of the Victoria Forum. And I want to thank Saul and Adele for ensuring that that happened. At the last forum, we were welcomed into the Inner Harbor by Chief Sam. There was a sports panel that was held with people. The Dame Louise Martin, who was the president of the Commonwealth Games Federation, was here, as was Rick Powers, who is the president of the Commonwealth Sport Canada. We also held a plenary session, and we continued working, and as Saul said, finalized the declaration at that time. It was finally completed last year in November of 2023. And I was invited to present it to the Commonwealth Games Federation Annual General Assembly, which was held in Singapore. After my presentation, the declaration was acclaimed by the delegates from over 70 Commonwealth countries. And 1 month ago today, Chief Wilton Littlechild, who also worked on the declaration along with me, we were invited to make a presentation on the declaration to the Commonwealth Sport Ministers meeting, which was held in Paris, France, on the day before the opening ceremonies of the Paris 2024 Olympics. During our presentation, we spoke about the historical injustices that Indigenous people in this country have suffered for many years, including colonization, theft of our lands, and the dark history of the residential schools. We also spoke about how our children were treated at those residential schools for over 150 years, and how we are still dealing with many of the social issues that are the result of the intergenerational trauma that so many of our people continue to carry. Chief Littlechild spoke about the time that he spent in the residential school and said that during that time, sport saved his life. We told the ministers that the declaration is a universal document with 10 calls to action, and said that it will compel organizations to challenge the lack of Indigenous people's participation at all levels, and will promote programs to close the gaps identified by dedicating resources in accordance with Indigenous people's needs and interests. It will also champion best practice in sports and increase the representation and visibility of elite Indigenous athletes and their culture. We now need to focus on the action items and move forward. Let's use this declaration to give our young people hope and inspiration so that they can achieve success in sports and in their lives. We invited everyone at the ministers' meeting to not only support, promote, and implement this declaration, but to also consider it as part of a global campaign to advance peaceful coexistence and reconciliation. When that happens, Indigenous athletes can dream big, and when they take to their sport, they will know that their communities and their ancestors are running with them. Our presentation was very well received by the Commonwealth country sport ministers. And after the meeting, the following statement was included in their ministerial outcome document. They said, We support the Commonwealth Sport Declaration on Reconciliation and Partnership with Indigenous Peoples and commit to transparent and accountable governance frameworks with zero tolerance for corruption, discrimination, and abuse. We call on all stakeholders to strengthen their efforts to respect, protect, and promote the rights and opportunities of Indigenous peoples in and through sport, and request the Commonwealth Secretariat to complement these efforts through the work of the Commonwealth Advisory Body on Sport. Furthermore, we commit to reporting on progress against the 10 calls to action of the Declaration at future Commonwealth sport meetings. We are now working on promoting the Declaration more widely, amongst other international sporting events and organizations, and encouraging them to sign on to the Declaration and begin the implementation of the 10 calls to action. And when they do sign on, they will receive a certificate confirming their signature, and it will have an imprint of the paddle, which is behind me, the Lekwungen paddle, which was designed specifically to accompany the Declaration. There will be an imprint on that certificate of the paddle and what the symbols mean. We will be holding a roundtable session at this year's forum on Tuesday, August 27th. And international working group members, many of them will be joining us virtually. And we encourage you to attend and support us in our efforts and help us to give Indigenous youth hope and inspiration to work hard to achieve their dreams. I just wanted to close, but again, by thanking the Victoria Forum, especially Saul and Adele, who have been on this journey with me since 2019. Their dedication, their commitment, and passion for this declaration is to be commended. And I want to thank them and the Victoria Forum for making the declaration such a huge component of the forum. Let's all remember, it's for our youth, and let's work together to give them hope and inspiration. Yawa.
Thank you, Ava. It is a real privilege to be able to be part of the development of the declaration, and we look forward to the implementation. Our second initiative that I'd like to tell you about came out of the very first Victoria Forum in 2017 from a workshop on impact investing. To provide an update on that one, I will ask Dr. Basma Majrubi, Director of the Impact Investing Hub and a Professor of Finance in the Gustafson School, to come up to the podium. Basma?
Hi, everyone. I'm too short. Next time I'll bring something. I hope you see me. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I tried very hard to write my notes so I don't exceed the time, but it's a great pleasure to be here. As Saul mentioned, I'm Basma Majrubi. I'm Professor of Finance at Gustafson School of Business, and I have the pleasure of leading the Impact Investing Hub. So it's also, as I mentioned, Saul mentioned this was one of the initiatives that took roots from the very first Victoria Forum that took place in 2017. We held a workshop that was dedicated to discussing ways to make Victoria a hub for impact investing. And in that workshop, there were many people. Some of them are here today. I see someone already there. We had professionals, both from the supply and demand side of capital. We had students, we had academic, we had member of the government and nonprofit. And we were discussing for the whole day what are the barriers, why we can't move finance fast enough to address these global challenges. We know there is money, but we're not seeing it flowing to where it needs to be to address these challenges. So based on the ideas that were discussed there, and I'm going completely off script here, we decided to, I remember very vividly someone saying, yeah, but the University of Victoria should do something about this, right? And it resonated a lot with me. And so Since then, we engage in extensive consultation within the university with members of the communities, consulted with more than like 30 or more organizations. And we decided to launch the Impact Investing Hub around 3 pillars that are actually addressing directly the challenges that were discussed during that workshop in the very first Victoria Forum. So it went from an idea to action. And since then, I'm very pleased to say we only launched officially in the beginning of 2022. Since then, we have made significant progress. The mission of the hub is to accelerate finance towards positive impact, and around 3 pillars: education and capacity building, research collaboration, and sharing of data and resources to demystify, some of the myths that we think that, investing for impact comes at a sacrifice for returns. So since then, we enabled 21 students to learn skills through internships, just like less than 2 years, paid internship with many organizations gaining experiential learning opportunities. We engage in research collaboration within the university and with members of the communities. We engage in more than 37 community engagement events to educate people about impact investing and collaborate with multiple organizations. And just this week, actually, we are running an impact investing summer school for students from across the university, all levels, all disciplines. And some of the people here came and talked to the students. We had fantastic conversations. And students here, you can say hi. Yeah, Senator Galvez was there and many others. And so just also in terms of research, because of the collaboration that the hub created, the platform that is focused on cross-disciplinary collaboration, we took part in a big initiative in the university, a big research project that is focused on helping communities decarbonize and accelerate their energy transformation. So through the hub, we are collaborating with people in engineering, in social sciences, and many other disciplines to work and making finance as one of the core strategic research area to advance community energy transformation. This is our ASET initiatives. So over the past 2 years, we stayed true to this mission. This is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. The Impact Investing Hub was born from the collective energy and vision of the Victoria Forum. And it's only through continued collaboration that we can truly maximize our impact. So today, I invite each of you to make connections, explore new ideas, more importantly, act on them. So lots of connections. I think everybody leaves inspired, but I invite you to think about, take something and then act on it. And we at the university welcome your ideas, your collaboration. And let us just use this year's Victoria Forum as a launchpad to advance our collective goals and continue building a future where impact and innovation go hand in hand. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Basma. We'll hear more from Basma tomorrow afternoon at a session on innovative financing mechanisms for accelerating decarbonization. And now, to inspire us with her words, please welcome the Poet Laureate of Victoria, Maria Metaphor Specht, who has composed something very special for us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Klein. And thank you to the forum for making space for poetry to be a part of these very important conversations. It's an honor to be here today to share 2 poems with you. We are living in an age of collective worry, collective experience of climate grief, collective anxiety over global conflict, the housing crisis, the opioid epidemic, poverty, the ever more tightly squeezed middle class. It's hard to ignore the forest fire smoke in the air that we all must breathe, or the inflation at the grocery store, the heartbreaking levels of human suffering on our very own streets. We are living in an age of worry and grief over issues that feel insurmountably large. These ruptures in our relationship with the world, these ruptures in our trust that the world is a good and safe place, lead to feelings of anxiety, apathy, helplessness. It is an act of bravery simply to turn towards the fire, to return to the simple act of living after these ruptures. It takes courage to choose to give ourselves to this world again and again. This first poem I'm going to share with you is called To Break. Here we are, barefoot and fog-brained, blinking at the gray afternoon as we cautiously begin to open, wearily turning back towards the world in the face of all the terror, all the beauty. We uncurl our broken, unclench our jaws, unsquint our eyes. Our unbudded fists stretch around warm cups. Leaning against the counter, we sip coffee and bend towards the day. Quietly arranging our bodies, we ready ourselves to break again. The world offers so many ways to break us, but together we are brave. The question becomes, how do we move forward in the face of these looming obstacles? It can all feel pretty overwhelming. I've found that the answer lies in each other. Us humans are inherently interdependent and cooperative. The poet Ross Gay said, "In almost every instance of our lives, our social lives, we are, if we pay attention, in the midst of an almost constant, if subtle, caretaking, holding open doors, offering elbows at crosswalks, letting someone else go first, helping with the heavy bags, reaching what's too high or what's been dropped. This caretaking is our default mode, and it's always a lie that convinces us to act or believe otherwise. Always. The small and large ways that we come together to help, to take care of each other, have always been a light in the dark, an antidote to the worry, a reminder that we can be brave, that we can trust each other. This last poem I'm going to share with you is called Even in the Dark. It's a kind of gratitude, isn't it? The way the bud bursts to blossom, each petal an unfurling thank you to the sun. It can be so much harder for us humans to find our gratitude. Granite gray days steeped in grief are tough, plentiful, and rightly, justly so. This world of ours offers so much worry. When the ink of it seeps into your pages and you cannot see beyond your own dark edges, remember that you are an underlined passage in someone else's story. It isn't just your life and my life, their life and our life. There is only us, all of us. Extraordinary, unknowable you, with your joys and suffering, with your secret thoughts and hidden tenderness, with your voice and humor, your singular ache, your nuanced wonder. You have offered something of yourself to this world, and the world is changed as a result. You have offered something of yourself to this world, so in turn, I offer you this blessing. Let your waters be clear and still. Let your glass be full and your table long. Let your roots be deep and your branches supple enough to dance through any storm. Let there be days when you are safe and willing to unfurl your gratitude to the sun. Let every dog-eared page of your life indicate a small beauty you may return to, a moment you shared a fear or a laugh, that time you were mostly wet shoulder and steady arms. Each time you notice something ordinary and breathtaking, like a face, any face, when you are really able to look. Our lives are built of these moments, the small common beauties, the shared darkness, all the times we saw each other, the times we connected and helped. This is how you offer yourself to the world and how the world offers itself to you in return. Let these moments be a reminder of your place in the fabric of things. Fold the corners of their pages so you may return to them when you are lost in the grief-soaked days, so you may return to them even in the dark. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Maria. That was terrific. And now to the main event, our opening panel on building trust for a shared future, which will set the stage for the rest of this forum. To introduce the panel and moderate the discussion, please welcome Senator Brent Cotter. And if all of the panelists would come up, Verona, Mr. Manley, is Dr. Sinclair here? Oh, there he is.
Thank you, Saul, and thank you to Chief Sam for welcoming us to his territory and to our remarkable poet laureate for the inspiration and the other commenters earlier. I want to share with you initially how we hope to proceed. I'm going to make a brief comment and then I will introduce each of our three plenary speakers. We're doing this, as you can see, in a conversation style, and I will be posing a series of opening questions to them and perhaps some follow-up questions. And then we'll invite you in the audience and watching online to pose questions to our speakers. When we do come to that stage, I'd ask you in the 20 to 30 minutes that might be available for that to identify yourself and pose a question. But when I say this with respect, not give a speech. We really do want to hear from our distinguished speakers, and there will be plenty of opportunity for us, I think, to share our views as the course of the conference proceeds. I was going to say we will try for a hard stop at 5:30, but with your willingness, we might extend a little bit longer and interfere ever so slightly with the time for the reception. I'm honored to moderate this opening plenary, and I want to welcome all, and especially my 11 Senate colleagues, 12, I think, if we include former Senator Munson, which would make 13 in all, I may call it a Munson dozen. And whatever you may say about the Senate, and people say a lot, your presence here, colleagues, is a statement that says you care. Thank you. As you know, the theme is building trust in our shared future, and there's a wide range of themes and perspectives to be addressed. Indeed, the sessions are so engaging, I think, and I think you will find it exactly the same way to this afternoon, tomorrow, and Tuesday, and cover such a fascinating range of topics and perspectives, some simultaneously, that I have come early and asked the tech people to establish a cloning booth so that I can attend more than one session at the same time, and I invite others of you to join the learning booth with me. We have, I think, a terrific opportunity these next couple of days, as you have already heard. I'm going to now move, if I may, to the introduction of our plenary speakers. Mr. Manley asked me to be brief. I'm disregarding that because I think it's important that you know the depth and quality of the folks who will be speaking and discussing things with us this afternoon. First, Her Honor, the Honorable Janet Austin. I realize I'm speaking to an audience that knows her well and perhaps very much better than me. She is the 30th Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, summoned to this position as the Vice Regal Representative by the Queen, ultimately and presently King Charles III. She has served in this role with distinction and energy since her appointment in 2018. Prior to her appointment, she was Ms. Austin, as she then was, serving 15 years as the Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA of Vancouver, one of the largest nonprofit organizations in this province. Her work there, particularly in support of vulnerable women and children, is legion. I read about her contributions and achievements, and quite frankly, they are exhausting. She has served on a wide number of boards and with organizations across British Columbia, including as the former chair of the Vancouver Board of Trade. She is a recipient of the Order of British Columbia and as a recipient of an honorary doctorate from the Kwantlen Polytech University in this province. She has been quoted as having said, and here I'm paraphrasing, "If it matters to you, speak out." I'm confident that the issues before us today matter and that within the parameters of her present position, Her Honor will speak out. Secondly, John Manley, PC, OC, he's described in Wikipedia, and I quote, "a Canadian lawyer, businessman, and politician." There's more, but this is a pretty humble opening to describe one of Canada's leading contributors to public life and business affairs in our country. In public life, he served as a member of Parliament from 1988 to 2004, as a cabinet minister from 1993 to December of 2003 in a range of leading portfolios, industry, where as a lawyer, I find this amazing, he promoted technology, including in schools, the wired classroom. I say amazing because lawyers, particularly of a certain age, if I may say, John, and I would include myself in this, have tended not to be leaders in technology. Indeed, I threw away my quill pen a couple of weeks ago. Remarkable foresight and vision in that respect. John also served in foreign affairs and led Canada's security response to 9/11. Indeed, for that work, he was named Canada's Newsmaker of the Year in 2001, a pretty tumultuous year, as I recall, and served as the Minister of Finance. I think he'd be a self-described fiscal conservative. In that capacity, nevertheless, he supported critical social initiatives in healthcare, childcare, and support of First Nations, and served as Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. He returned to legal practice and has served with distinction on a number of boards. But just with respect to legal practice, this point gets passed over, if I may say. In 1976, John clerked with Chief Justice Bora Laskin of the Supreme Court of Canada. That might not mean very much to you, but as a former law professor, I'm aware of the distinction with respect to clerking in the Supreme Court of Canada has now and had then. Very few people, only the best of law graduates get to clerk in the Supreme Court, and only the best of the best of the best are sought out by the Chief Justice. John doesn't make a big deal of that, but it is a very distinguished honor and reminder of the quality of his legal career. He served on many boards. I could list some of them. He's an officer of the Order of Canada, presently chairs the board of TELUS, which is one of the forum's sponsors, as you may know, and continues to be a strong voice for Canada and its future, and I'm confident you will hear that strong voice today. Dr. Nigan Sinclair. Dr. Sinclair is a professor and head of Native Studies Department and holds a professorship in Indigenous Knowledge and Aesthetics at the University of Manitoba. Widely published and award-winning editor on Indigenous issues and history, just published this book, Nigan, Winnipeg Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center. I haven't read it yet, but no doubt it's worth reading, and whoever brought this may have trouble getting it back from me. Having said that, though, he is best known to you, I think, as a public speaker and media commentator. He appears regularly on CTV, CBC, and APTN to speak to Indigenous issues, and is a power panel member of CBC's Power and Politics. He's been recognized as a Canadian columnist of distinction, columnist of the year at the National Newspaper Awards. Maclean's Power List recognized him as one of Canada's most influential individuals. And one of the great universities in the world, Georgetown University, awarded him the Peace Educator of the Year award. I think you can count on him as educating us today in this conversation. And if I may say so, a conversation about the issue of trust would be far less meaningful, perhaps empty, without a powerful perspective. And I think Dr. Sinclair will bring it from a leading Indigenous thinker. Welcome, Dr. Sinclair. I'd like you for a moment to welcome the panel, and then we'll get started. Now, I'm going to sit down, but I want to pose the first question standing up, if I might. We're going to talk about 3 dimensions of trust. The first is, based on your career experience, and I'm going to ask each of you in turn, if I may, based on your career experience, knowledge, and learning, how critical is the role of trust in advancing the interests of institutions, communities, businesses, stakeholders, citizens, and ultimately the wider public interest? In other words, does trust actually matter? Your Honor?
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to answer that, I guess, by saying, and I think this is a view likely shared by most of us here, is that trust is absolutely essential. It's essential to the functioning of our democracy, really to the survival of our democracy. It's essential to political and government stability, the legitimacy of governments as well. I mean, if people have trust in our public institutions and our governments, then they will vote. They're more likely to be civically engaged, more likely to participate in civil society. So these are all strengthening aspects. It's fundamental to market stability, to investment, to economic stability generally, to the smoothness of business transactions, investment. It's also fundamental to innovation, because I think in high trust environments, there is less perceived risk in taking on new ventures. And so you, I think, have a greater appetite to work in perhaps an iterative way. And I want to say as well that it's fundamental to reconciliation. And I do want to acknowledge the Songhees people who have so generously welcomed us here to the Songhees Wellness Center, and just to acknowledge the appalling historic treatment of Indigenous people in Canada, who have continued to work to raise families, to valiantly carry on their traditions, despite the culture of abject disrespect practiced upon them, despite the apprehension of their lands, the apprehension of their children. So I think it's really key to making the kind of strategic investments in reconciliation that are fundamental to the future of our country. It's much more than just a moral and a legal imperative. So I think, yes, trust matters. That's the assumption I start with, and I assume that's the case for most of you. However, I think there's disturbing information that not everybody shares that view. And I recently saw a statistic that was 13% of Canadians, I think this is a relatively recent survey, are very open to authoritarianism and are do not see the importance of elections. And so I think that's a response to chaos, that what they feel is chaos, and a desire for more stability. So while I think most of us share the view about the importance of trust and democracy, I think we need to perhaps do a better job of reaching out to people who don't share those views. So who do we have in all the rooms in which we engage? How do we actually reach out across those boundaries in society and economy, and engage with people whose views are different? I think we probably have to become a bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable and actively seeking out some of those uncomfortable conversations. And then I would just have one more observation. And I think when we look at trust, my observation would be that trust is really fraying at the macro level, We all know that there's less confidence in elites really across all the institutions of society, but it seems to me that it is holding at the local level, at the community level. And I think we need to pay much more attention to what's going on locally and those networks that are holding together. I think there are answers for us there. And I guess in that respect, I would just refer people to the World Happiness Project. I think many of you are familiar with John Helliwell's work. And I guess it was a couple of years ago, essentially post-pandemic, he did work looking at that whole issue of benevolence in society. And he found that, in fact, despite polarization increasing, there has been a significant global increase in pro-social behaviors. So that's willingness to volunteer, willingness to help a stranger, willingness to give philanthropically. And I mention that because I think those are things that are manifest mostly in local communities. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll follow up on some aspects of that.
I think you've covered everything in mine, so I agree.
Does trust matter, Mr. Manley? What would you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, you very kindly or unfairly described the fact that I've been unable to hold down a job for very long in the course of my career. And since your question was framed around career experiences, I'll try to reflect a little bit of that. But first, I'm very pleased to be here. I love to come to Victoria. I haven't been here recently, but as a minister, I was here regularly. And it really is one of my favorite places in Canada to come. And I'm really here because former Senator Jimmy Munson asked me to come, and he promised me $10 if I mentioned his name. And I trusted him. But you know, he and I have a long track record together. We worked together for Prime Minister Chrétien. He was an important contributor to the work that we did in those days when I was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. He was one of my supporters when I ran for the leadership of the Liberal Party. Now that tells you two things about Jim Munson. One is that he has a very kind and generous spirit. And the other is that he has very poor judgment, because I was probably going to lose that race, which I did. But all of that to say, you know, we fundamentally function as a society and as human beings based on trust. I'm here because I trust you, Brent, to moderate a panel in which we can develop some constructive thoughts. I trusted Jim Munson not to waste my time and to ask me to do something that he thought would be worthwhile. You know, of course, may have been a little shaky, but I trusted Air Canada to get me here safely. Now they got me here 2 hours late, but anyway, I made it. You know, and as you were saying, the whole engagement of our society, people to people, government to people, business to business, commercial relationships, human relationships are all fundamentally based on the concept of trust. And you know, I know you showed us our questions. I know we're going to come to the erosion of trust, and I don't want to, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that, but I want to say that I think we need to take a glass half full outlook on this question of trust. Yes, there are lots of problems in the world. We've heard a few of them already described. There are lots of problems that we're confronting, sometimes in rather incoherent ways. And yes, there is hot conflict in the world, which none of us likes to see. But fundamentally, the system has worked and continues to work on a very basic level, person to person. And I'd prefer to say we've got a foundation of trust, certainly in Canada, and I believe internationally, upon which we can build. What we need to do is see that foundation as something to which we can, by our actions, by our words, we can either accrete it, we can grow it, we can build it, or we can erode it, we can chip it away, we can diminish it. And that's an active choice for each of us, whether I'm thinking about lawyers and the legal system, whether I'm thinking about politicians and our government leaders, whether I'm thinking about our business leaders and the businesses that we are part of. That is a choice. And it's one that therefore we all bear responsibility with respect to the outcomes.
Thanks, John. Dr. St. Clair.
Okay, so bonjour, and ndiri magadaduk ni gan wewdum de digital cost na mago shindo den ni men wenda mo mai ayin. Bonjour ni Michel Masak, na kumasak. Mijana Gijik, Nimiji Nibekwe, Bungi Pegwis, and Donchi, Anishinaabe and Dao. It's nice to be here. It's nice to share with you the language of the territory. I come from Treaty 1 territory. I shared with you everything that you need to know about me. One of the great things about hanging out with Anishinaabe or Indigenous peoples generally is we just lay it all out on the front. So we give you everything you need to know about us, from our ancestors to who we're related to the territory that we come from. And I think of nothing more of a conversation around trust than that is a theme in which that is what I offer to you. Everything you need to know, I just said it. And much like I think fundamentally when we have the conversation around trust, we want to think about what it is that we have shown each other over periods of time and over history. And I think I come from kind of different hats. So of course I come from the university hat. So I have a long history of writing and thinking and teaching and that kind of thing. But I also do public work as well. So I'm a public person that works, I write columns, and then I'm also cards on the table, a contracted CBC person. I don't even know if you call employee, but I have these kind of different hats that I wear. So I want us to think a little bit about what are the intersections that create trust? Because that's really what we're going to talk about for today. And with deep respect for what Mr. Manley here, for what you just shared with us.
I'm John, okay?
Okay, John. Well, you may want to say Mr. Manley after this, but that the system, the problem with the system is the system has only worked for a limited amount of people. Yeah. And that's the problem of why there's an issue of mistrust in the country. So the trust comes from three perspectives, or three different positions. The first is an issue of integrity. So do you have integrity? Do you lay it all out of the line, as it were, of where you come from, the territory that you come from, the values that you bring to the table? That's really fundamentally what begins a conversation around trust. The second thing that happens is, are you accountable to what you just said? Meaning that you publicly share, you publicly report, you identify, you hold true to the values that you say you just did. And then that brings us to the third conversation, which is really what frames the other two, which is an issue of justice. Is your principles and what you're accountable to an issue of justice? And we can bring a whole bunch of different things in there: eco-justice, social justice, gender justice, sexual justice. We can talk about all those different things that we go. And fundamentally, the problem is that Canada has worked with a triad, with that considering what those three things involve. When we insert power and we consider power as that element of the barometer of has Canada worked, it really has only worked for a set number of people, a certain set of genders, sexualities, a certain set of geographies. And this is where I'm fully aware that I'm not talking to a lot of people perhaps from Manitoba, but my book is all about how the center of Canada is not Toronto. It is not Montreal. It is certainly not Ottawa. It's the prairies. The prairies, which is the future of this country, is found in the most employable population. The very principles that led us to democracy and multiculturalism, which did not come in any way from Britain or France. They came from Indigenous communities. And then ultimately, what it is that we're going to lead us to in the future, which is how do we get along with each other? That is through methods that Canada learned mostly on the prairies, which is issues around treaty and how do we look at each other and give each other those gifts and medicines. And so that's the challenge of trust. The challenge of trust is, can we, in all the institutions that we represent, and I happen to come from a university and from a newspaper, the question ultimately is do we have integrity? And what is those principles that lead us to integrity? Are we accountable to those values that we then present? So for example, I come from a newspaper that consecutively for over 50 years endorsed a certain political party, and that therefore led to only a certain set of stories being told continually and consistently, and they were thoroughly anti-Indigenous. And so day one, when I'm hired as a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, the #1 readership response, which is, it's not a pleasant one. It's one in which our readership says they're very uncomfortable. I can read you some of the, but my favorite piece of mail that the editor of the Free Press got was, oh, the Free Press is now an Indian newspaper. Not because we hire one Indigenous voice, a single Indigenous, but you can tell that that's a disruption that is led by accountability. So when we begin to insert accountability to what we say that we are, which we are purportedly a voice of the people at the newspaper, then that leads us to justice. And that ultimately, are we a newspaper that actually represents the people in which we purport to represent? If we call ourselves the Winnipeg Free Press or the Free Press or Manitoba's newspaper, I could insert the Globe, I could insert CBC, I can insert anything. Do we respond to the people? Do we resemble the people? Do we identify with the people? And do we reflect the views of the people in all of them, all the different political views that we hold on to? We say the same thing about a university. I would say the same thing about a government. That's what trust is ultimately all about. And unfortunately, while I think the country has worked for a group of people, some of them in my family, that come from a population that immigrated from France, later Quebec, ended up in Manitoba, or Britain, later Regina, and then into Winnipeg. British, French families have done extremely well, have to not worry, for example, to be over-policed or to be in neighborhoods that are full of long-time issues of poverty or suicide epidemics or issues involving a government that continues to target them according to policy. There are groups of people that have not experienced that. And we can talk perhaps about that in the second stage of perhaps mistrust. But when Canadians then see that mistreatment, that long time series of mistreatment, they then see that as the status quo, as that's the normal way in which you behave. But then when that's interrupted, and good, bad, great, ugly, whatever you think of the current federal government, it is the most progressive government on Indigenous issues in Canadian history. I can say that fully aware, knowing all the different intricacies and problems with this federal government. But when you do something different, then people begin to have mistrust, and they begin to say, oh, this is an Indian government now. And that's the same thing that happened at the Free Press. It's the same thing that happened in the 1970s at universities. And so those three pillars are really what I want us to think about for tonight: is integrity, accountability, and then justice. And remember that the barometer is power. If we look at the ways in which who has power and who does not, then we can begin to see if we are fixed, or if we are resembling those three pillars as being in balance. Now, here's the last thing I'd like to share about trust, which is, as an Anishinaabe person, I can't not tell a story. So I'll just quickly tell a story about how power lives in our community, or how trust lives in our community, or how power exists as well. But trust is based on a basic premise, meaning that anyone who purports to be an ogamok, or a leader, and ogamok it's the word we use for leader, the ability to pull people together, the ability to be believed in by a group of people. It's how communities are formed. It's also how communities fall apart. So the barometer of an ogama, which is a leader, which is basic. It's very basic. And it's held by the grandmothers, who are like the Supreme Court of our community. So the grandmothers are the ones who determine whether a leader is both instilled or removed. All you need to do is remember that next time that you hang out with grandmothers. Like, what would we be like if we had a society run by grandmothers? And exactly, a lot better, I think. But the barometer is simple. The grandmothers look to see is, has the ogama eaten last? That's the basic teaching, which is, and we could talk about food, but we could also talk about medicine. We could talk about resources. We could talk about just the idea of who's left behind, which is that if the ogama eats first, And I think oftentimes our political leaders, our institutional leaders, even myself, we are encouraged, if I come to events, to eat first. But in our society, the Ogama always eats last. That's how trust is instilled in the institution as a whole, whether the governance or whether the society or whether the lodge exists. It's, does the Ogama eat last? And if we lived in if we studied in institutions in which the leaders of those institutions ate last, that would be the basic formation of a system of trust that would follow those pillars that I spoke about and also share power. Miigwech.
Thank you. Thank you all. I should just disclose that this is not like the debaters where they get a surprise question. The next two questions are really about whether trust has declined and also then what are the strategies to address it. We've touched on some of that already, and I invite you to look at that question, but I want to kind of, if I may, drill into a little bit that each of you talked about relationships. I think it's, and I think, Your Honor, you hinted at this in some ways, and I would describe this as, in conventional ways of thinking, trust is often a function of distance. That is, if you're close to people, you build individual trust. I wrote down some examples. I trust my own lawyer, for example, but I don't particularly trust lawyers in general or the people who regulate lawyers. I trust the person I deal with at the bank, but I'm not too happy with TD as a whole these days. These are, though, examples, I think, that Nigan highlighted that are kind of part of the conventional system and in which I'm a relatively comfortable person. So closeness, easy, YMCA, it's a YWCA, it's a, you're locked in terms of trust and confidence and contact. So one of the questions there is, how do we reach from that localized trust to more institutionalized trust? But with respect to Indigenous people and First Nations, that distant lack of trust in, let's say, governments and larger institutions also exists at the local level, at least with respect to non-Indigenous communities. The Indian agent was actually the agent of that oppression brought right to the local level. So I'm inviting you to reflect on the one hand, the building of trust beyond just individuals in order that the society can be richer and we can have confidence in our institutions. And then when we get to you, Nigan, how much bigger a challenge that might be for Indigenous communities. Do you want to reflect a bit on that, Jen?
Yeah, sure. You know, and that's, I mean, it's such an important question and perspective. I think that is really the big question, is how we take those opportunities or those places where trust exists and then move that into the broader society, the broader community. And so I guess I would say that something I'm quite attracted to is the idea of doing more what's called deliberative democracy. And these can be very complex mechanisms for bringing people together. So, you know, bringing a whole bunch of people together to work in a sustained way over a period of time with expert facilitation on some big challenges. And I think it's interesting because we do see that through those processes, people are able to find those places of compromise in between the extremes of public opinion. However, the problem with it, I think, is that the exercises we've seen so far have very little connection to political leadership and very little connection to the broader community. Nonetheless, I think there's something worth looking at, perhaps worth working towards. And I would say, I don't know an awful lot about this, but I'm certainly aware that Ireland has had some very interesting experiences with a series of deliberative democracy. And I'm looking here at Maureen, who I think is probably very knowledgeable about this. But I think opportunities like that, we need to take a closer look at because there's no point if we don't find some way to break through those boundaries that divide people in society and in economy and broaden those conversations. Also, we need to find ways to deal with complexity, right? So I think we're all attracted to simple solutions. I love that saying that for every complex problem, there is a simple wrong solution. But there's very little appetite for complexity. And I think we need to do our best to overcome that. And part of that, I think, is the whole issue of low levels of political, economic, and media literacy. So I think in terms of economic literacy, many people don't know the difference between debt and deficit. So really basic concepts. I think as a society, we need to put much more effort into, into building that literacy. And I think that is one way that we can work towards broadening trust.
Thanks, John.
So the erosion, I'm going to try to stay in my lanes of experience and say, I think, and the numbers bear this out, that we've seen over the last few decades an erosion in public trust in at least some of our public institutions, certainly in the political ones. And my experience is at the national level. I'm not going to try to comment on local government. I'm a citizen of a local government. I'm not part of it, but I've spent a long time in federal politics. And I would say there's been a substantive change in the way the political actors have dealt with issues and dealt with each other. We've got former Prime Minister Joe Clark among us, and Joe's even older than I am, so I can risk being characterized as a curmudgeon when I say it wasn't like it is now when we were there. And I always had the notion when we were in politics that if Coke decides they're going to attack Pepsi by saying, "Oh, don't buy that, there's probably broken glass in the bottles," pretty soon nobody will buy soft drinks because they're afraid of consuming broken glass. And I think there was a time when we accepted that our political adversaries were not enemies, that we might see different paths towards the outcome that we all wanted, which was the betterment of our country and our society. We may have different routes to get there, but there was a mutual respect, and you didn't attack from a point of view of personally tearing down the other side or saying that they are corrupt or they are this or they are that. And I think what has happened is, and part of that was based on, political strategies. Political strategies were you wanted to win support for you by convincing supporters of somebody else that you were the better choice. It seems kind of fundamental. That's not how it works today. The way it works today is you want to reinforce your supporters so they show up and vote. You want to discourage the others' supporters so they don't show up and vote. You're not trying to persuade. It's a wholly different thing. And we're going to watch this play out over the next number of weeks south of the border, where one of the world's largest democracies, and certainly its most important, is going to resolve its presidency based on about 100,000 votes in 5 or 6 states. And it's going to be about who shows up to vote. Don't worry, you're not going to see former President Trump campaigning in New York or California. They're done. They're over. You're not likely to see very much of Kamala Harris in some of those, flyover states, as they call them. They're decided. They're not going to be won by her. You're going to see a lot of time and a lot of money spent in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and so on, the 5, 6 states that are going to decide the election. The issue here is the product of this process, and it's the same in Canada, it's just different kind of construct. What are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve power. That's what you were talking about. the outcome is power at the expense of trust. Which is why I said, you know, we have a responsibility. Political actors have a responsibility. Business actors have a responsibility to remember that the one thing we actually have to make the whole thing work for anybody is trust. So, I mean, you were kind, you mentioned TELUS, it's one of your sponsors. They sponsored me to send me out here. And I've got to say, I mean, we've tried to take that in hand in a corporate culture where we're saying, well, how do we contribute to the overall well-being? We still got to make money. We've got investors, and they've risked their money, and a whole lot of them are retirees because all of the telcos and the banks are both seen as safe places to put your money in Canada because you're going to get the regular dividends. We got to run a business. We're not a charity. We're a business. But we have been fully engaged in this whole concept of social capitalism. How do we make capitalism work? By unloading the social obligations that come with it, whether it's making sure that our core business of telecommunications, communications is available to people despite the adversity that they may face. How do we make sure that we broaden the availability of services into communities where they might otherwise not get it? It doesn't make necessarily economic sense, but it's part of building it. And I think, if, I'm only a tiny bit biased here, I think TELUS is possibly the best example that I could think of, but it's also true that other businesses are recognizing that if you want to satisfy your customers, if you want to hire the best people, if you want to retain loyalty, if you want to build trust in your brand, you've got to do more than be really successful at making a profit. And so I think that has become a lot more accepted in the business world, while at the same time, the drift has gone the other way in the political world, at least the part that I'm familiar with, where it's become how do we undermine trust in him so that I end up with the power at the end of the day. And I think that's something that we should all worry about. And the one thing that citizens can do is don't reward it. Don't reward that behavior.
Unfortunately, the two of you have already answered my very best follow-up question, but I'll drag something out of it in a minute or two. Again, the challenge in the world of Indigenous communities and where you find trust in relation to non-Indigenous individuals who burdened those communities, or the larger picture of government and government policies over the decades and centuries seems to present that much larger challenge in the crossover to reconciliation. Thoughts on?
Yeah, I guess what I'll say is this: a country that has been historically promoting selfishness as the illusion of freedom shouldn't be surprised when selfishness then becomes the central force in its political system. And I say that with great kindness and affinity. I have deep love for not just my community, which, as you can see, I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book about Manitoba. You'll find somebody you never find anybody that deeply loves all the different branches of my family and the ways in which there is absolutely no anger or hatred in anything I ever say. But I can tell you that I can call a spade, and it is, we will never go forward by going back. There is no pleasant yesterday of Canada. There's no oh, the politics work better over here than here. And I don't think in fact, that is the number one lesson I think we can take from our relatives in the medicine line on the south side. That's the United States. And as I think the number one thing you're seeing, and you saw it perhaps during the days of Obama, is a coalition of hope. A coalition of differentiating groups who otherwise, like, what is it that Democrats do well? Well, disagree. Like, that's the whole point. And in fact, that's what Indigenous peoples, that's like our number one thing we do, which is I say anything, and then an Indigenous person right beside me will be like, well, I heard it different, or I know it different. And two truths can operate in the same truth. And what you're seeing with the Democrats at the moment, which is a racialized woman who is able to bring together differentiating groups within a very disparate group of people, and all different types. And we heard a little bit talk about Gaza tonight. We heard a little bit talk about LGBTQ. We talked a little bit about like all of these different groups. We even see at the Democratic National Convention what will likely be the very first Indigenous First Nations governor in state history, which is Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota. So we just in Manitoba elected the very first First Nations premier, which is mind-boggling when you think about the fact that we don't deal with provinces. Our First Nations don't deal with provinces, and now one of us is head of them. That's hope. That's the coalition of hope in every single case. And that's by going forward, by looking where we are and going forward. Here's what I mean by that. I think all of us perhaps have a rancor for social media. I am absolutely with you. In that there is I come from a newspaper that's been banned off of Facebook, which is a direct target against Indigenous communities, where media, mainstream media, has abandoned our communities. The defunding of the CBC has led to absolutely no media within most First Nations in my province, about 80% of them. So there is no newspaper, there is no reporter. That means that we are going to see more and more people who are not held accountable, because humans are humans. I don't care what government you are a part. But weirdly enough, social media is our media. And that means that we depend on social media to share information around the forest fire, also share what's happening in the band office, or share the information that's coming from Ottawa, which otherwise would not be told from including an Indigenous perspective coming from Toronto, because the media has shut down the local Manitoba affiliate, and now we get our so-called Manitoba news from the office in Toronto. The problem ultimately is that then social media becomes this critically important part of the media landscape within the country. Diversity, the multitude of opinions, which then we see involved within political parties, is a good thing. Like, I think at times we see it as rancorous and combative, and I think all of that is true. And I think absolutely what you said is true, which is that we encourage people not to vote for things or to vote against things than we ever do to vote for things. That's the number one thing I ever learned growing up, which is that I remember my father saying to me one time that I only vote for things, I don't vote against things. Meaning that if I can find something to vote for, I will vote for it. And that's that glass half full thing that you're talking about there, which is absolutely. But what is that really talking about? What's the coalition of hope? What's the coalition of hope that every single one of us in our institutions are finding within what I think is a logical outcome of a long-standing system of injustice, which is now only coming to light for the very first time in this country? And it's injustice within our institutions. For instance, the University of Manitoba trained all of those educators that then went and purported or perpetuated the violence in the residential school system. So we have to take accountability for that. We have to apologize and make reparations for the fact that not only did we train those who went to residential schools, but we also then took the human remains that we found in archaeological digs and then disrespected them and put them in Tupperware containers, which never would have happened if they were British or French, period. And so we have to make reparations for that. And we have to take accountability. We have to share that with the public. And that's a good thing. The only reason we know those stories is because of the increasing diversity of opinions. And the way that we do that is by looking at the coalitions and of possibilities amongst us, which is the diversity of voices. And just like we saw during certain political movements, and I think during a certain prime minister that only 9 years ago was brought to office through a coalition of hope, that we see those as moments of strength within our country that then rebuild the possibility of trust. It's going to be turbulent, Because the problem with trust is that after a long series of mistrust, and you asked me about Indigenous communities, when a cop shows up in our community, nobody thinks you're there to help them. Nobody. When a paramedic shows up, we don't think it's a good thing. When a person in a suit shows up in our community, and even if they are me, they think that there's trouble brewing. And that's because of a long history of mistrust, legitimate mistrust. But then when we rebuild that, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take decades. Slow, patient, steadiness. But we absolutely don't do that by turning back and saying, imagining some yesteryear of betterness. We look at where we are and we try to move forward from where we are.
I'll just make a brief observation again, which is links these comments that you just made to a societal commitment. This is the kind of going forward point that we didn't have before. A societal commit to a really substantive understanding of justice that can then be achieved going forward. And absent that, that bridge is going to be very hard to cross.
I think what you're talking, you just described truth before reconciliation. So we have to understand the truth before we can ever begin to reconcile anything.
And accept it, probably not, you know, like it has to kind of be owned by people who have benefited from society in past decades and generations.
Well, like I said, there's can be two truths in the same truth. And if there's any Indigenous teaching I offer tonight, it's that. It's that we find a way to have different perspectives of the same tree. And they can both operate.
I may have to bring you into my domestic relationship and sort that two truths thing out. Could I come back to an observation that each of you made that seems to me to be highly relevant on the question of the vulnerability of simple solutions, as you mentioned, and the riskiness and the kind of narrowness that presents. And indeed, when John was talking about the ways in which political capital are evolving to simple, often antagonistic solutions that we didn't used to see before, it seems to me that going down that path is almost like a risk of a pathological spiral where we reward, in a sense, the wrong things. John, you were hinting at that, in fact, that you stole almost, did you see my question before? You stole almost the exact language about we are, if political capital ultimately exists in winning votes for your side, we are actually moving to a point where less and less seems to matter in the reflection on those kinds of votes, because people are being invited to make the most simplistic and often emotional basis upon which they will make their choice. Janet, thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree. You know, I think we elect people when they tell us what we want to hear. And sometimes too much nuance, too much complexity, too much honesty can be the kiss of death, you know, for someone seeking elected office. So I think that is absolutely right. And it puts politicians in a terrible box, because in order to get elected, they have to simplify and they have to dumb things down often. And what that does is it creates an unrealistic expectation that cannot be delivered. And then we're angered when they're not able to produce what we thought they promised. So it does become a reinforcing cycle, which undermines trust. And so I think the real key there is how do we embrace more honesty? And how do we also take a longer term perspective? Because so much of this has to do with the pressure on politicians to achieve things within one mandate, which largely is impossible. And certainly when we look at the magnitude and the complexity of the existential challenges that we're facing on all levels. So I'd also say, you know, we're having many conversations about polarization, and this is extremely important. But the opposite of polarization is not uniformity of opinion. You know, we need to embrace, we need a diversity of different perspectives and different ideas to inform democracy. And when democracy functions at its best, it requires that. But what it does is it enables people to act collectively, you know, and it enables people who are who have different views to actually share power. And so much of that won't happen unless we have a greater mutual respect, I guess, across those partisan divides, and a stronger commitment to protocols of civility, frankly. So how we bring that back into public debate, the public discourse, and political debate as well. I don't have a simple answer, but I think these are things we need to work on.
There's no simple answer.
No.
That's part of the problem. To reflect on one of the things that you were saying, Liam, the demise of the traditional media is one of the sources of that problem, because there was a time when we could disagree based on a certain understanding of the facts. Well, if there may be more than one truth in a truth, but at the same time, there are facts and there's fiction. And one of the phenomena that we're observing is that people don't confront issues with an understanding of what those facts are. I mean, Senator Moynihan once famously said, U.S. Senator Moynihan, that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but everyone's not entitled to their own facts. And we've seen this play out in spades, I think, in the U.S. Over the last number of years. And I think it's very worrisome. And the other part of that, which kind of you were referring to, if I can take a few swings at social media, yeah, it might be a source of information. That part's good, but it's also the source of unfiltered and unverified commentary in which citizens have begun to stay in their own echo chamber, where all that they hear is what they agree with. And then that unfiltered, unrestrained commentary that comes from anonymity on those platforms has begun to spill over into real life. And we're seeing it I was in cabinet for 10 years. I had some pretty prominent jobs. I could count on two hands the number of days I had personal security in Canada. And they were because of certain things that were going on. Less than 10 days. Now we're having to have a conversation about how we protect our politicians. Why? Because that unfiltered, anonymous commentary is leaking into real life. And, my former neighbor, Catherine McKenna, couldn't take her kids to a movie in the neighborhood in Ottawa because people would hurl abuse and sometimes throw things at them during a family experience. This is a serious problem. The days of a million Canadians watching the National and then talking about what they heard and saw has gone. And I think that's one of the things we're going to have to try to figure out. I don't have the solutions for that. Smart people maybe can, but we've got to find a way that we can aggregate information, prioritize it, understand it in a way that that public policy makers can then deal with it under the direction of political representatives based on an actual clear and open democratic process. Complicated.
It seems to me to be a serious dilemma, both in two respects. One is the mechanisms by which this information gets shared seem like under no one's control, at least no one's verification type of control. That's a really difficult issue. But also then the content of those messages, which I think you were suggesting has evolved some from Catherine McKenna is doing a bad thing by advancing this policy versus Catherine McKenna is a bad person, and we should focus on how bad that person is. And that then contributes potentially to the way in which the institution itself, where that person serves, is getting eroded by the way in which that dialogue plays out. I was reading in the newspapers just in the last couple of days, a prominent conservative media commentator unhappy with two recent decisions of the Supreme Court of Canada. But rather than focusing on how wrong those decisions were, the argument was the Supreme Court of Canada has destroyed the Charter of Rights and has become an illegitimate institution. So it's a sort of a change in the focus of the critique, the harshness of it, but also the focus of the critique, well beyond kind of the substantive thought and all the way to the legitimacy of the institution itself.
And Brett, be careful when you make those criticisms of an institution like the Supreme Court of Canada. Be careful what you wish for, because it's hard to build institutions. It's hard to build credibility, but it's really easy to destroy them. And when you destroy them, what replaces them?
Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so many thoughts. I think the whole question around how we get our information, because the way we get information has so radically transformed. And that's obviously the tsunami of technological innovation, you know, the rise of social media, the total collapse of traditional media. So I think no matter what we do, we're not going back to the way things were, where we all did have that one source of information. It's not going to happen. So how do we actually provide some kind of coherence and access credible sources of information? What makes them credible? How do we know they're credible? And what do we do with these social media platforms, which are really controlling everything? So it seems to me that they're really there in terms of social media and how they are, you know, they've completely upended the whole business, you know, the business argument. But they're controlling advertising, which was historically the revenue source that funded traditional media, but they're also controlling distribution through the algorithms that actually tell us, you know, reinforce our existing biases. So I think there's really only two options there. One is kind of massive or much greater regulation of those massive online platforms. And that's something that would really need to be attacked really at a global level. And the other would be massive government investment in independent media. Now, I don't think that's likely to happen. You know, I don't think that's realistic. Certainly in the current political environment, we shouldn't expect to see that. But I would point out that there are certain European countries that do significantly invest in independent media. I think Austria is one. So I think we really need to think about what are we going to do and how do we maintain some kind of structures that are credible, that we can access and rely on.
I guess I'm uncomfortable with the giving up on democracy. And here's what I mean is that if we believe in humanity, then we believe in humanity.
Yeah.
And my question with, let's say, if we were to, let's take it out of this room for a second, but we can certainly use an example in Canada if we wish to. Let's use the example of the United States and these kind of perpetuation or perpetual falsehoods that exist and fly within social media. We can blame and hand-wring about social media all day. The question isn't about why it is that people believe in conspiracy theories. It's what's led them to want that conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And the answer to that is most oftentimes poverty or feelings of disenfranchisement or feelings of marginalization. And what that then leads to is a general paranoia around a Black president. Like, that's what people then hand-wring about, is around can a woman hold the Oval Office, or does she laugh too much? The reality is that the ability of people to be preyed on with their fears is the problem. The corrective to that, as I mentioned before, is hope, it's coalition, and it's also believing in the inherent ability of reasoned dialogue to win the day. And I am fully aware, having been a target of social media in many different platforms, particularly as a very public Indigenous person. I would perhaps say that my life has never been safe, and my life has never been operating in a place in which I've been able to ever speak freely without being bombarded with hate. And my very first column I wrote at the Free Press, my editor said to me, "Hey, write a piece about yourself, introducing yourself to the readership." And so I wrote a piece. I was like, "Hey, everybody, I'm Negon Sinclair. I'm going to write a weekly column here, and the number one criticism I got is, oh, you're so full of yourself. Oh, why do we gotta listen to you? And why do you gotta push all of your views on us?" I'm like, it doesn't really matter what I would say. It's inevitably going to be met with hate. At the same time,
by the way, is not new.
yeah,
That was happening years ago too.
yeah, and what I would
They
also
signed their names then.
well, the one thing I would say is there's also no point in voting as an Indigenous person until very recently. Period. There was no point. It really didn't matter what party you voted for, with due respect to everybody who was in this room. It didn't matter. It just didn't matter. Your life as an Indigenous person got exponentially worse. And it really didn't matter if the leader was Trudeau, Mulroney, Chrétien, Martin. It really didn't matter. And only until very recently have Indigenous peoples perhaps been invested within the political system, because we see changes happening that have been brought by social justice, which has been driven by social media. It has not been driven by newspapers like the Globe. It has never been driven by Toronto newspapers. In fact, if anything, it's been driven by newspapers outside of the major centers of Canada, if anything, and then predominantly social media. And so I think we should see that as a part of a really important movement. And yes, it is worth thinking about the disinformation, the feelings of those who have been disenfranchised. But my interest is not so much in the perpetuation of lies, because I deal with that every single day, on the various residential school deniers who, by the way, are former ministers of justice, who are university professors and former mayors of cities. You can get to the highest echelon of power in this land and hate Indigenous peoples vociferously. Just look around the country to see that the highest offices of several people within this country, you can get there with holding very racist views on Indigenous peoples, which says to you that we still have this kind of moment within the country. We ask ourselves, is the trust legitimate? Is the mistrust legitimate? And that's the question to ask ourselves, which is, why is fear so attractive? Why is paranoia so attractive? And that, I think, will lead us to why there is such a deep amount of suspicion around vaccines, or why people then get in a truck and then go to a major city and sit there for weeks. Because that, of course, is an issue that I think affects all of us. But it's also, my question is how did it lead to be that way? And I think asking that question will get us out of the hand-wringing of sort of social media or around mistrust of institutions and so on.
Thank you. That's applause to you. I want to bring this session to a close with, firstly, thanks to our three plenary speakers. I think have inspired us. And if I may say, without singling him out, but I'm going to do that anyway, Dr. Sinclair had an engagement late yesterday in Winnipeg and has another one tomorrow morning, I think, and made a really special effort to get here and engage with us. And I want to thank you, Megan, for that. That really is the prelude to the second of three brief things I want to say, directed at Nigan. I received a text from my partner, who I believe is wanting me to engage him to sort out, as between the two of us, the truths out there, maybe as a mediator. I'll tell her no. And thirdly, I brought two ties with me in case we should wear ties at this event. I was going to wear a black tie in case this was a discouraging experience, but I actually have this one, which is a sign of a very encouraging experience. And I wanted to thank our speakers and you for making this an uplifting start to this conference, at least for me, and I hope for all of you. Thank you very much.
Wow.
What a fascinating conversation. Thank you all. Also for demonstrating to us very clearly that you can disagree without being disagreeable. Thank you all for joining us for this 2024 Victoria Forum. Merci de votre engagement au cours des 2 prochains jours. Votre contribution va certainement enrichir nos échanges. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to all of you. Enjoy the evening and the conversations. Bonsoir.